Hello and welcome to Jerry's Live. My name is Michaela Westra and I'm going to be your host today. And as you can see, we have a guest with us today. This is Jeff Olson here from Royal Talens.
Hello everybody.
And he's going to tell us a little bit about Cobra Water-Mixable oil paint.
I am. We're going to talk about solvent-free painting today. So no more hazardous solvents in the studio.
Yes.
We're going to banish them forever.
And before we jump into all the fun stuff, I do want to let you guys know today's class code is going to be JL354. So if you pop that into JerrysArtarama.com in the search bar, it will show you everything that we are using tonight so you can get some of your own fun stuff tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're going to have a giveaway at the end too, right?
Yes,
so
we're also giving away some fun stuff.
Yeah, so you got to stick with it all the way through to the end.
Mm-hmm. He will be asking a question at the end. That will be mentioned during the show, and if you get that question right, you will have a chance to win that giveaway.
Oh, so exciting.
Yes.
No.
All right.
Am I up? I'm up?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Well, thank you, as always, for having me. Super excited to be here, and super excited to be talking about Cobra Royal Talens water-mixable oils. So real quick, Royal Talens is a Dutch manufacturer. We make brands like Rembrandt oils and pastels, watercolors, Amsterdam acrylics, and many other brands under the Royal Talens umbrella. And Cobra was introduced in 2010, so it's one of the newbies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because Royal Talens was established in 1899, so we've been around 125 years this year.
Oh my gosh.
I know, crazy, huh? So we got one of the newbies here, but very old chemistry, as I will share in the presentation. So I'm going to start off with a PowerPoint. That's kind of my gig, right? And we'll go through that together. And then at the second half, we're going to do a demonstration featuring some of the mediums along with the paint so you can compare how the mediums interact with the paint and change the working properties, which is kind of what they're all about. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump into the presentation. Some folks are going to see the PowerPoint as I project it. Other folks are going to see it here on the table. Michaela is going to flip those pages. So solvent-free oil painting with water-mixable oil. So that's really what it's all about, right? Folks who are interested in not using turpentine or white mineral spirits and they want to use oil. So what's the solution? Water-mixable oil paint. So mix and clean with water. All right, so the next slide, here we go. So why paint solvent-free? So there are generally three reasons that people come to me and say, I want to paint solvent-free. The first is health. Some folks just have zero tolerance for solvents. Maybe you're working in a space that doesn't have very good ventilation. And if you're using things like turpentine or white spirits or even odorless mineral spirits, you need really good ventilation. So health is the primary concern that a lot of folks have when talking about painting solvent-free. Next is environment. You can't just dump solvents down the drain, obviously. And depending on where you live, it can be harder or easier to get rid of those things. So environmental concerns are certainly part of the equation. And then finally, just peace of mind. So ease of use, not having to have solvents makes it easier to paint more directly. Convenience, like if you're traveling, if you're plein air painting and you're taking a flight, you can't bring solvents with you on the plane. So there are a lot of peace of mind issues or advantages in using water-mixable oils. So I got a quick agenda here. So we're going to talk about what's in the name, and I'm talking about Cobra specifically. I get asked a lot, why do we call it Cobra? There are no venomous snakes lurking the streets of Amsterdam. So where'd this name come from? Then a super brief history of oils to give us some context. Then we're going to talk about what oil paint is. There are some basic ingredients in the manufacture. Then we're going to focus in on the paint binder, and for oils, that's the drying oil. So I'll share with you some of the ones that you're most likely to come into contact with. Then we're going to talk specifically about water-mixable oils and what makes them unique, which is the secret ingredient we call an emulsifier. We'll talk about the history of emulsifiers in art, because there's a lot of them. And then we'll look at the auxiliaries, which are the mediums, and that'll give us kind of an intro or a segue into our demo. Last, or almost last, I'm going to share some of the myths, because there's so much misinformation out there about water-mixable oils, and hopefully we'll clear some of that up for folks. I'll talk specifically about some of the qualities of the Cobra artist, which is what we're working with today, share a couple tips, and then we'll get into the demo and the Q&A. All right, so let's take off. First, why Cobra? So like I said, no snakes in the streets of Amsterdam, so where'd the name come from? I mentioned some of the brands that Royal Talens manufactures. Rembrandt, Van Gogh is another one, Amsterdam. So they all kind of give a nod to Dutch culture or Dutch art history, and Cobra is no different. Cobra was a avant-garde painting movement that appeared after World War II, and it included artists from the cities Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. So the first letters of those cities are what they brought together to call themselves the Cobra artists. They had a lot in common with post-war American painters like the abstract expressionists. They were interested in surrealism. They were interested in what they called primitive art, something we'd call outsider art today. They were against convention. Anything about traditional painting or academic painting they were against. This is a quote by Karel Appel, who was the Dutchman in the group. He's the guy in that plaid jacket with the fancy mustache. I love his look. You know, I got to pick that up later on. But he says, "We do not want to be understood, we want to be freed." And it's that spirit that we embraced with Cobra, being freed from solvents. And you'll see that a lot in the packaging, the labeling, and the marketing, this idea of infinite freedom from solvents in the painting process. So that's why we are calling the product Cobra. So now my super brief history of oil painting. So a lot of folks think of oil paint as beginning in the West during the Renaissance, and it actually predates that by several centuries. Okay. The oldest known oil paintings were discovered in Afghanistan in some caves in the Bamiyan region, which you can see here on the image. It was an important trading hub during the time of the Silk Road. So goods were coming back and forth from east to west, and it was kind of centrally located. So a lot of artisans came through there. And in these caves, they discovered, and here you can see one of them. You may remember this in 2001, the Taliban blew up these monumental sculptures of Buddha that were carved into the side of the mountain. Behind them were discovered these network of caves that were filled with these murals of the life cycle of Buddha. And when they analyzed them, they discovered they were oil painting. They used poppy seed and walnut oil as the binder and pigment. And it was pretty advanced, the technique. And they dated these as being from the 7th century. So quite a while before we see oils appearing in the Western tradition. And a lot of people speculate that there are probably earlier examples and we just haven't discovered them, or they no longer exist anymore. But based on the expertise and execution of the paint, it certainly leads experts to believe that. So oil painting really is a very old medium that predates the Western tradition. Of course, when we get to 15th century Europe, we see oil painting becoming defined in the way that we are familiar with it. The grandfather of oil painting is Van Eyck, Jan van Eyck. We think of him and his brother Hubert as really being the ones who began the oil painting tradition as we know it today in the West. This is a picture of him. You can't see it on this, unfortunately, but you've probably seen the painting, the man in the red turban. We think this might be a self-portrait. But he did some innovative things that really redefined oil painting from what we saw before in those caves and what would go on to be the standard way to paint with oils all the way into the 20th century. So one of the first things he did was to polymerize the oil, which is to cook it up, to heat it up. So that changed the consistency. It also changed the working properties. It made it more like honey than an oil in terms of its texture, kind of like what stand oil is like today. Really good for the techniques that he developed called glazing. He also introduced turpentine into the mix. So turpentine existed before this time, but it wasn't really a standard part of the studio materials of an artist. It wasn't easy to get a hold of at that time, and so his introduction of it into the process to make his paints leaner, to mix them, was something that was new. Next, he started adding other ingredients to it. This goopy mess here is pine resin that's being made. So they would cook down this pine resin and add it, and it was another ingredient that would change the working properties and make them do the kind of things that Jan van Eyck wanted them to do. And then finally, he added something called a cicative. And a cicative is usually a metal salt, typically from lead. And when you add it to oil, it speeds up the oxidation, so it speeds up the drying time. So these four things were very unique to this time, innovations that really changed the way that oil painting was practiced from that moment forward. And the reason I like to share it with is a lot of people think of oil painting as this kind of pure process. It's just oil, it's just pigment. But in fact, in the earliest form of the tradition, artists were altering it. They were alchemists in the studio. They were doing all sorts of things. So, we can kind of toss that idea of purity out the window. Here's an example of a painting in tempera. This is the type of painting that was practiced at the forefront before oils became the primary medium. And you can see it's kind of stiff. It's representational but not realistic. And oil paints, especially in the manner that Van Eyck developed, and other artists like Van der Weyden, and we'll look at one of his, same subject here, the descent from the cross, and how it changed the way that they could represent reality. Van Eyck called it the beauty of earthly things. So this emphasis on creating images that were realistic, how we saw things in nature, was very much part of the Renaissance tradition and their mission. And oil paints made that possible. They had a broader tonality. They were easier to blend because they stayed open longer, and really opened the door to this kind of ultra high realism that we see practiced at that time. So oils made that possible. So what's in oil paint? So there's a few ingredients that I think you probably guessed. The primary ones are a coloring agent or pigment. We tend to use pigments for artist grade because dyes are fugitive. They're not light fast. So pigments are light fast. We use them, but they aren't specific to oils. We use the same pigments in the making of acrylics, watercolors, you name it. So those are universal. Binders are what really are unique for each different medium. And for oil paint, we use a drying oil. Other ingredients that can be used in the manufacture today, we use extenders or fillers. The picture here is calcium carbonate. Back in the Renaissance, they used to use marble dust sometimes too. It was used to add body to the paint. For student grade paints, it would replace pigment so that you still had a good consistency even though there was less pigment in the mixture.
Right.
So that's one of the things that you would find still in practice in manufacture today. Stabilizers are often added. Some pigments don't like to behave. They resist wanting to bond with the binder, so we add things like aluminum stearate, pictured here in very small amounts, just enough to make the pigment settle down in the binder. Solvents can be used in the manufacture of traditional oil paints. All pigments have different personalities. Some make really stiff paint, some make really fluid paint.
Right.
So sometimes solvents are used to bring them together and make for a more consistent paint across a line. And then resins, just like we saw with Van Eyck, can be added to the paint to change its consistency. And then finally secatives, again, just like Van Eyck, can be added to speed up the drying process, again, to make the whole line of paint work the same. All right, so what is a binder? Binders are really important in understanding because every medium's working properties are determined by the binder. So gum arabic for watercolor, acrylic polymer resin for acrylics, and in the case of oils, a drying oil. And this is what makes them behave the way that they behave. The coloring agents are the same. If you look up the definition of binder in the dictionary, it says it's a liquid substance that hardens through a chemical process. And that's true.
Okay.
Not all binders for paint do that, though. Gum arabic is an exception, for example. It does not create a paint film that's discernible. It kind of absorbs into the paper. But a couple things that they all do is to suspend the pigment. So pigment is like sand. It doesn't dissolve in the binder. If you were to pour sand in a glass of water and stir it up, it would disperse, but eventually it would sink back down to the bottom. So a binder needs to kind of hold it in place once you stir it up. So we call that a suspension. And then it needs to adhere. It needs to be a good adhesive. It's got to stick to the canvas or the wall or whatever you're painting on. So suspension and adhesion are characteristics of all binders that are really important. So what are the binders for oil paint? So everyone probably knows this one. This is linseed oil. These are seeds, flax seeds. I get asked questions, why don't we call it flaxseed oil? Do you know why we
don't.
You don't? So lin is actually the Old English, Old Norse for flax.
Okay.
So linen shirts, linen fabrics, all those things, what we're really saying, we're saying flax. We're just using the Old Norse or the Old English for that. Kind of a fun anecdote there.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. All right, so linseed oil, super popular, has been for almost 500 years. It is definitely the most durable of the drying oils, so it dries and creates the most durable paint film. It dries the fastest. I know that sounds crazy since oil paint dries so slow, but compared to other drying oils, linseed oil dries more quickly. The only downside to linseed oil is that it can yellow over time,
Right.
and you mostly notice that in lighter colors or whites. Safflower oil is another drying oil. It comes from the safflower thistle. These are all vegetable oils, by the way. Safflower oil doesn't make as strong of a paint film, but it's non-yellowing. And because of that, it's often added to the manufacture of white paint today to offset the yellowing properties of linseed oil. One of the catches there, though, is safflower oil is a slower drying oil.
Right.
So you may notice on your paintings that white seem to take forever to dry.
Yes.
And that's probably because they have some safflower oil in them. Next, we have walnut oil. Walnut oil, very popular all the way back during the Renaissance. It's very expensive, so it's not something that's used very often in the manufacture, although there are some lines out there that still use it. It's a strong, durable paint film. It's non-yellowing, lots of good attributes to it. If you do use walnut oil, or if you've used it as a medium, which a lot of folks do, you have to beware, though, it can rot in the jar and make a horrible odor.
Yeah.
It can stink up your entire studio. You will know if you've got walnut oil that's gone bad. It's like something has died in the corner. So you want to beware of that. But other than that, a really good oil to use in mediums and in paint. And then finally, poppy seed oil. You know, I mentioned walnut oil and poppy seed in those early paintings in Afghanistan. Poppy seed oil is still used today, not so much in the manufacture of oil paint, but certainly of varnishes and mediums. A lot of folks like to use poppy seed. It's a clearer oil, non-yellowing, but slow drying. So those are the four most common drying oils that we'd be engaged with as oil painters today. Now, a lot of folks will say, why can't I use olive oil or something like that? It's because they don't dry.
Right.
You could mix your pigments with them and paint with them, but they would never dry. So that's why we call them the drying oils. All right, water-mixable oils. So what makes these distinct? Well, a couple things first. Water-miscible or water-soluble oils are other names for them. They are revolutionary paints that have the characteristics of traditional oils, but without the need for harmful solvents. Water-mixable oils are genuine oil paints. I can't state this enough. A lot of folks think that there's something about them that's completely different, or they use ingredients that are different. They're not. They're genuine oil paints. They have a drying oil as the binder. In the case of Cobra, it's linseed oil. Unlike traditional oil paint, the binder has been modified and mixed with an emulsifier that allows you to use water. And here's that. The emulsifier, we're going to go into more details if you're not familiar with that term. So what is the emulsifier? So some of you may have heard this term before. An emulsifier, an emulsifying agent, is a compound or substance that acts as a stabilizer. It prevents liquids that don't normally mix together and holds them together. So it's very common in food products. Anything you buy in a can or a bottle or a jar has some emulsifier added to it to keep it from separating. Emulsifiers are occurring naturally in the world around us. Our bodies have emulsifiers holding the fat and the oil together, if you will. So they're everywhere around us. They're very common in production of food and medicine and you name it today. And they are also something that's part of the history of art materials too. If you were to look through a microscope at what an emulsifier does, this is what you'd see. So one end of the emulsifying molecule is what we call water-loving or hydrophilic, and the other is fat-loving or lipophilic. Philic literally means to love in Greek. So if you look at the image here, we can see the emulsifier attaching itself to the fat molecule and then bonding with the water around it. So that's what's happening when you introduce the emulsifier to the linseed oil and what allows it to bond with the water. I love that kind of that graphic because it really does kind of put it into context of what's happening. So emulsifiers, like I mentioned before, are part of the history of art. It isn't something that we just cooked up in the lab here recently. If you look at some of the earliest painting materials like casein, the ancient Egyptians used it. Casein is a milk protein or a milk fat that's mixed with the pigment as the binder, but water is used as the vehicle because milk is and contains an emulsion. Matter of fact, the word emulsion or emulsifier, its Greek root, which we talked about, means to milk because milk is an emulsion. So very early example of the use of an emulsion in paint. Another example, which we already talked about for briefly, are tempera paints. Tempera paints use egg yolk as the binder. The pigments are mixed with it, and water is used as the vehicle because the egg yolk has a naturally occurring emulsifier in it.
Okay.
So two examples of emulsifiers in the history of art. To take that even one step further, when we look at the early Renaissance and we see how artists were transitioning from tempera to oils, they didn't just make it in one leap. And often artists were using a technique called tempera grassa. Tempera grassa is where they would actually mix, and you can see it here in this fun little image, the egg yolk with the oil to create a binder that was still mixable with water. So they were making their own water mixable oil paints back then. And I've got a fun example here. So here we see two paintings by Bellini. Bellini was a very famous early Renaissance painter, kind of the father of Italian oil painting, if you will. But in the image on the left, we see one of his earlier works from 1460, which is done in tempera. And then the one beside it, which is from 1480, about 20 years later, which is in tempera grassa. So this is where he's introduced the oil paint. And when you look at a detail of it, you can see how it changed his painting style and what he was able to achieve.
Right.
The image on the left, very beautifully done, but the image on the right, much smoother in the transitions, the values, a softer look to it, better color, tonality, just a more realistic representation of the hands of the Virgin in both these paintings. So this shows an example of an artist back in the 15th century using the tempera grassa technique to achieve this higher level of representation in the painting. All right, we didn't forget this, and this is something that I always love when I come across it. Tempera grassa was something that was always kind of lurking in the background of oil painters' toolboxes, if you will. And I found a great example in the Painter's Question and Answer book that was published in 1948 by a guy named Frederick Tubbs. He was a famous artist teacher in New York City in the 40s, 30s, 40s. Frederick Tubbs, Frederick Canvases, he lent his name to those.
Oh, okay.
So we still have a record of him about.
Yes.
But he wrote several books about painting and paint materials. And I have had this book since I bought it at a garage sale like years ago. And in the back, I found this section that he called oil tempera painting. And he actually gives a formula for creating this mixture. He's got 1 part oil, 2 part egg, 3 parts water. And he creates a binder that he added dry pigment to that he could create a paint that was water mixable. Huh. And he talks about using it as a binder but also as a medium, and he talks about it specifically so that he could use water as a vehicle as opposed to using other solvents. So here was an example from more the modern era where this was still very much in practice. So when we devised Cobra, this is our reference here. So it's actually something that's been with us for centuries. All right, so auxiliaries. Today, during the demo, this is what we're really going to be featuring, partly on the working properties of the paint, but also what happens when we work with mediums. You don't have to use mediums. Technically, all you need to do with Cobra is the paint and a brush and a canvas and go to town.
Right.
Water you don't even have to use. That's really something that you can just use to clean with, but if you want to thin your paint with it, you can. But mediums can add and enhance the experience. So we use them typically to alter the consistency of the paint so we can make the paint thinner or thicker. It alters the transparency, so if you want to paint like Van Eyck and have more transparent color, we can do that. You can use mediums to alter the drying time, so we can speed up the drying time or slow it down. And then finally the finish. Most mediums will make the paint a little glossier. So these are some of the basic reasons why folks use mediums. And you can see some of our primary ones listed here. We have a painting medium, which we're going to use today. Glazing medium, which is for that Van Eyck Old Master technique specifically. We have a quick dry medium that does the same thing as the painting medium, but it speeds up the drying time in addition. And then the painting paste, which we're going to use today, which is one of my favorites. Okay. Super fun to use. And then we also have some varnishes. One note, all varnishes contain solvents, including Cobra varnishes. And the reason for that is varnishes are meant to be able to be removed at some later date, 100 years from now or whenever. And to do that, they have to have a solvent in their makeup so they can be removed without damaging the underlying paint film. So if you're looking to varnish your painting and you're somebody who has health issues related to solvents, you want to make sure you take care, even with the Cobra version. All right, and I wanted to announce we got some newbies. So there's a brush cleaner, we have some safflower and linseed oil, there's a medium mix, which is unique amongst all these. You can actually add it to traditional oils to make them water mixable. And then there's a paint thinner as well. All right, so some of the myths and misinformation around water miscible oils before we get into the demo. The first is that they contain water. I hear this all the time. Oh, I want to try those water-based oil paints. There's no water in these paints. It's linseed oil and pigment. There's no water, only what you add. So that is false. That it's not a true oil paint. As we've kind of established, that's false. That would be like saying Van Eyck's oils were not true oil paints,
right,
because he synthesized and polymerized them and did all these fun things to them. These are a true oil paint in every sense of the word. That they dry faster. And I think this comes with the idea that while I use water with acrylics or water with watercolor, they dry really fast, so these must dry fast too. It's actually the opposite is true. They have the same working properties as oil paint, so they dry at the same rate. Water actually evaporates slower than turpentine or mineral spirits. So if anything, a lot of water added to the paint is going to make it dry slower, not faster. It takes about 72 hours for water to evaporate completely out of the paint film. Where solvents can evaporate in minutes sometimes. All right, cannot be mixed with traditional oils. This is false. You can mix these with any traditional oil paint. We're going to do it today. And they mix really well, not only with paints but other mediums. The only thing that happens is you can then mitigate their water miscibility. The more traditional mediums, the more traditional paint you add to them, the less likely you're going to be able to continue to use water as a vehicle. That they work like acrylics. This is false. They don't work anything like acrylics. Totally two different animals. I think where the confusion comes up is a lot of people hear that you can mix acrylics with these paints. Now there are some manufacturers that say that's okay. We do not recommend that. And the reason is oil paint dries through a process known as oxidation.
Right.
So it's absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere, a very slow chemical process. Acrylics dry through evaporation. They're losing moisture into the atmosphere, very rapid chemical process. So you could mix them together on your palette, you could paint with them together on the surface, but because they dry very differently, down the road it could cause problems. Now I have people say, oh, I do it all the time, it's no problem. I haven't had any problems. That's great. That's great for you. But I don't recommend it because I don't want somebody who's painting to slide off the canvas 10 years from now and call me up and say, you said I could do this. So we don't recommend it. Artists are going to do what artists are going to do, but we don't recommend it. Next, that they're not archival. A lot of folks are concerned, obviously, with the archival quality. The Cobra artists are completely archival. Matter of fact, I would say that they have probably been tested more vigorously than any paint in modern history. Certainly more than Van Eyck's, and his paintings have been around for hundreds of years. So these are definitely archival. They're made with the same pigment formulas that we use with the Rembrandt paints. That they have less pigment. Again, false. Just because we've added the emulsifier in very small amounts to the linseed oil, it doesn't change the absorption of pigment. So you have the same pigment loads in Cobra Artists as you do in Rembrandt. Great color in these paints. There is a Cobra study, totally different line, student, academic paint, but Cobra Artist is 100% a professional paint. All right, so a couple other things to say on Cobra real quickly before we get into the demo. They do have what we call a superior pigment to binder ratio, so we get as much pigment as we can into the paint. They're an extra fine grind and triple roll mill. So this is as important as how much pigment is in there. If you've ever seen a paint mill, it's those great big rolling pills, one stacked upon two, and the pigment and the paint goes through there and it mills the pigments down to smaller particle size, but it also disperses the color more evenly through the paint. The more it goes through the mill, the smaller the pigments, the better dispersion, the better the light refraction, and the better the color. So milling is really important, and these are milled to what our highest level, which is extra fine. They have high light fast ratings, so the majority of these have excellent light fast, which is 100 plus years under museum light conditions. They come in a range of colors that includes opaque and transparent colors, and semi-opaque and semi-transparent in the middle. So lots of techniques available. They are formulated for consistency of ease. So what that means is that we have formulated all these colors so they behave the same. There isn't one that takes longer to dry or one that's stiffer than another. They all have the same buttery consistency. They all behave in the same way in terms of their working properties. There are 4 price series, so there's Series 1 up to Series 4, and that's based on the exclusivity of the pigment. They do contain exclusive pigments like cadmiums and cobalts, so something to be aware of. There are 2 sizes, 40 mil and 150 mil, so that's the basic overview of the line. A couple quick tips before we get into it. Cobra mediums, moderation, moderation, moderation. So you can use the medium in any amount, but if you're just starting out, a little bit is best. Right. Next, the recommendation in mixing them with traditional paints, if you want to maintain the water miscibility, is 4 to 1. I have found 2 to 1 works for almost all the colors. There are some slight variations as you're going in there, so it's worthwhile to experiment as you're going along. We're going to do 2 to 1 today, so I'm going to put it to the test. But they can be mixed with the traditional oils, and if you maintain that ratio, you can still use water. And then don't exceed a ratio of 1 to 1 paint with water. And this is the same recommendation that a lot of oil paint manufacturers make when mixing with solvents. The more solvent, in this case water, you add to the paint, you break down the binder, and that means when it dries, it's harder for those little molecules to form a great or a consistent paint film. But I do have a hack, if we have time, for folks who like to paint in really thin washes of how you can achieve that with Cobra without breaking this rule. All right, one last thing. Here's a QR code for the RevOILution online magazine with everything you ever wanted to know, including an article by yours truly. And check that out if you want to get some more information on Cobra. Oh, and one more fun thing. I had to mention this, you guys. So there is a new movie out. I don't know if you saw Loving Vincent. Loving Vincent was, I think it was 2017. Completely animated movie, hand-painted in oil paint. They used our Van Gogh oils for that. So the same company now has made a new movie called The Peasants. It's based on a Polish novel that won the Nobel Prize. It is out now, and it's a completely hand-painted movie again. And this time they used Cobra. And they used Cobra because when they used the Van Gogh last time, they ended up having to break up their teams in all these different studios because of the solvents. They couldn't have everybody in the same space. So with Cobra, they were able to get everybody together in a larger studio space. They saved more money, but still got the great results. So they used literally 100% hand-painted film, 70 artists combined. They were both in Poland and Ukraine until the war. Then they're all in Poland. 200,000 combined hours it took to paint it. 1,300 liters of Cobra oil.
Oh my goodness.
It went through. It premiered at the Toronto Film Festival this past fall, and it's out streaming now, actually. Yeah, so you can stream it at home. And if you want to learn more about it, thepeasantsmovie.com. And I've got a couple fun images. So here they are working on the film, and then I got a couple details where you can see their palettes. And you can see in the one image how they're looking at the live film, and then they're recreating it in the oil painting. I've got another image here that shows, one of the panels, and I love this because you can see the little color swatches at the bottom. Yeah, because they would paint one scene, and then they would change to the next image, and they would have to consistently change that. So one painting could be several frames in combination. So it was really kind of a cool process. And here's kind of a scale of it. Here's the two producers of the movie, lying down amongst a bunch of the finished images. So super fun. So check that out. If you're a painter, it's visually just incredible to see the animation. All right, demo time. So just a quick introduction.
Oh, I'm sure we do.
So, we got lots of questions.
Yeah.
Oh, fun. So we're going to mix the traditional oil, in this case Rembrandt, with the Cobra. Then we're going to do some drawdowns with Cobra only, Cobra with water, Cobra with the painting medium, and Cobra with the painting paste, one of my favorites. And then if we have time, I'll show my little hack. All right, so that is it for the PowerPoint.
So let's go ahead and take some of those questions.
So you mentioned that walnut oil can go bad.
Yeah.
Will it go bad on your painting?
No.
And if so, will it make it smell?
No.
Okay.
No. Only if it's in the jar in mass. First of all, you want to make sure it's sealed up so it doesn't get any oxygen in it. And some artists will refrigerate it, and that helps protect it too.
And then, is casein still used as an emulsifier in oil paint, and should it be listed on the tube if so?
No. So casein is its own paint, standalone type of paint. It's still manufactured today. There are some folks out there who make casein paints in the tube, so you don't have to mess around with any chemistry to buy them. It's not used as an emulsifier. So the binder in casein is that milk protein, and that's not what's used to make paints water mixable. We use something called a surfactant. And that's the secret ingredient. I can't tell you more than that, or I'd have to.
Yes.
Have to kill you.
And they were concerned about possible allergies.
No.
Okay.
No.
And then the last one I have is, for now, can you paint on both acrylic and oil primed canvases with this?
So the recommendation from the manufacturer is that you paint on acrylic or universally primed surfaces, which is 90% of them, right? Oil primed surfaces, we advise against that. And that's really to protect folks who might be using water in the process. So if you have an oil primed surface and you're using water on the top of it, it's just going to bead up. And so that can impact the adhesion and the drying time of the Cobra paint. So it's much better to paint on an acrylic or universally primed. Now if you were not using any water at all,
Second, we are.
It should be back. Hold on. Give it a few seconds.
Yes, we lost sound on YouTube.
okay.
Oh, no.
Just
Okay.
a second.
Okay. Hold on, folks. Technical difficulty.
Go ahead and re-answer that question. So they asked about if the paint would go bad.
So the answer is no. As long as you practice good paint maintenance, which means
Yes.
make sure your caps are put on tightly, make sure you're cleaning the threads of your caps before you put them on. And one tip I share with folks is when you're done squeezing out some paint, kind of push the paint up so that you don't leave a little space where air can gather, and then put the cap on. That little space that you leave there that often happens, that allows the paint to oxidize and creates a little cork of paint.
Okay.
And so that can be a problem. So as long as you're squeezing that paint up to the very top before you put the cap on, and it's on there really good, that paint tube's going to last indefinitely.
Perfect. Now, are there toxic pigments within this line?
So there are some colors that include exclusive pigments like cadmium and cobalt, and they are labeled. So majority of the colors have the little AP label, approved product by the ACMI. The carcinogenic pigments or known carcinogenic pigments like cadmium and cobalt will have the Prop 65 label on them. They can be used safely in your studio. The big hazard from cadmium and cobalt specifically is pulmonary, if you breathe in pigments, the particles themselves. So in the oil paint binder, they're very safe. But you still need to be concerned about the disposal, right? So you don't want to just be flushing cadmium and cobalt down the drain. That's the real hazard of those minerals, is getting into the groundwater. So be careful that you're practicing good, safe disposal if you're using those pigments. So they are there, they're labeled. You can avoid them if you want. There are substitutes for those colors in the line that are excellent. So it's up to you.
Okay, and then we have a couple of questions about using like traditional oils and traditional oil mediums with these as well. The first one is if you use a traditional medium like a solvent-free medium like Gamblin has one, can you be using that with Cobra even though that's meant for traditional oils?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, you can use them. They're solvent-free, but they're not water mixable in the case of the Gamblin products. So if you add them to the Cobra, then you're pretty much going to be painting like with a traditional oil paint. You're not going to be able to use water as a vehicle, nor will you be able to use it to clean up. But you can use them. There's nothing in these paints that would prohibit you from using any type of oil medium. The only thing you'd be doing would be mitigating the water miscibility of the paint.
Which includes the next one I have, which is asking if it can be mixed with cold wax.
Yes, yes. I actually, some of my ambassadors who use Cobra, some of them use cold wax, but it does mitigate their ability to clean those particular brushes and tools with water.
And then the last one is, when you mix Cobra with a traditional oil, how would you go about cleaning your brushes at that point?
Then you'd be cleaning your brushes just like you would with a traditional oil paint, which would be the easiest, would be some type of spirit or mineral spirit or terps. But there are products out there, some really good brush cleaners that get oils out. They actually contain an emulsifier in the brush cleaner that pulls the oil out of the brush and doesn't use any solvents. So, you know, I recommend shopping around. There are several out there that work really well. Masters, the little Masters brush, those work fantastic. Yeah.
And you were saying something earlier that I thought was a really cool thing to know too, is if you are using traditional oils in combination with these water mixable, if you go from traditional oil to the water mixable and you end up mixing it on your brush, you can just clean your brush with water after that.
Yeah, because the emulsifier in the Cobra eventually extends to the traditional oils on your brush and helps release it from the fibers. Yeah. Yep.
All right. Any other questions before we jump in? All right, let's go
let's
ahead
go
and jump
for it.
into the demo.
Well, first I want to show one of the obvious things is why we don't use traditional oil paint with water. So I've got a tube of Rembrandt, one of my favorite colors, transparent oxide red.
Yes.
Now this is the biggest selling color in North America, even more than titanium white in the Rembrandt line.
Really?
Yeah. The Dutch are really confused by that. Why do they sell so much of that color? But there are so many traditional oil painters, and I shouldn't just say traditional, so many oil painters in general. I just love this color. It's a great base color. All right, so there is the oil paint, and I'm going to do something that just is crazy. I'm going to get my oil, and you try this too.
Okay.
So, can I mix the water with the oil paint? And the answer is no. If you can see that, you can see the water just drips down the side.
Yeah.
My brush is smearing it around,
Oh,
but the
man.
water is not integrating it.
This feels so wrong.
And get a shot from above. So you see it from above there. There's my water jar. I'm going to put this in there, and I'm going to try to wash it off the brush, and it does not come off. I'm just smearing oil paint on the bottom of the jar. But you see the color of the jar does not change at all. All right, so we're going to clean off our brush best we can. I'm going to squeeze out now a little bit of the Cobra.
Should I do a different color?
Yeah, try a different color.
Let's go with yellow.
All right, so I'm cleaning as much of the Rembrandt paint out of here. But I'm going to show you a big difference in how water now mixes. So here we just kind of smudged the oil paint around. The water didn't mix with it at all. Now I'm going to go into the Cobra, and you can see right away how the water mixes with the paint. Even with that little bit of Rembrandt oil on the brush, we get a nice lean layer of color.
I like this mixture I'm getting.
Yeah, it is a nice color, isn't it? Super nice, very fall color.
I'm ready for this fall.
All right, so here's where you really notice the difference. So look at the water from before, still is virtually clean, right? A little bit of that paint on the bottom. So now I'm going to put this color in there, and boom, you can see how now the paint comes off the brush and is distributed throughout the water, just like if I was working with any other water-based medium. But this is true oil paint, so fantastic magic happening there. All right, so now we're going to put it to the test. I promised that we could mix the two together and maintain the water miscibility, so I'm going to put out 2 to 1. So I've got 1 part my Rembrandt, and I'm going to use the yellow too. That was so nice. So now I'm going to put twice as much of the Cobra.
Alright, so 2 scoops.
This is not scientific, I'm just eyeballing it here. So we can see here I've got the Rembrandt oil, traditional oil, and now the Cobra. And now I'm going to mix those together. You could use a palette knife for this, would probably be easier, but we'll use a brush. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's such a nice color.
It is such a nice color, isn't it? Warms it up. All right, I've got a nice mix there, I think. So now let's get some water on our brush and see if we can get that to mix. And sure enough, you can see it mix. So there's enough emulsifier in the Cobra to extend out and cover that traditional oil. And this is great. This was really a game changer for a lot of folks who have an investment of traditional oils, have been thinking about trying water mixable, but don't want to throw out all those paints. You don't have to.
Right.
You can integrate it into the painting process. Or there are some colors maybe that you just love, and we mentioned Gamblin. Maybe it's a Rembrandt color that isn't available in the Cobra line yet. And so you can integrate that into your palette, no problem, and still not have to worry about using solvents. And then you can clean that from your brush. All right, so let's go to the next phase, and we've got some canvas boards here.
Oh, yes.
And we're going to do some drawdowns now, where we're going to show how the paint performs by itself, with water, and then with the mediums. So I'm going to put down just a little bit of a bead, about an inch long, across here. And then I'm going to clean and dry my brush as much as I can. I don't want a bunch of water in this, so I want mostly a dry brush here.
Okay.
Scoot it over there. There we go. So we're both on there. All right, so now I'm just going to kind of pull the paint down, and I'm going to make a swatch. These are the primary colors in the Cobra line. I just love them. This is the magenta, and then you've got the cyan, and then the yellow. They are a great triad for mixing colors, but they're beautiful by themselves. So you can see how the paint looks, and then what I like to do is just kind of do this fun kind of back and forth and pull the paint down. And what I like to show, and I'll lift this up so you can see it a little better. So the paint right out of the tube has this nice buttery consistency. You can see the brush strokes there. This was a dry brush, so as I'm pulling the paint down, it starts to give that broken color effect as the paint runs out of the brush. And so you get a nice feel for how the paint performs just on the raw primed canvas. The next one, I'm going to use blue for this one.
Alright.
This time we're going to introduce water, and we're going to create a more fluid paint. So I'm cleaning my brush over here off to the side. Let me scoot it over.
Are you
Clean it
jumping
off.
in with
And I'm going to come
wet?
in, yeah, I'm going to
Okay.
come in. I'm going to load up my brush with water there. So I dipped it in the water, and now I'm going to make a swatch again. And you can see right away, actually one thing that's fun to see is the color slightly tints at first. That's the emulsion taking place.
Oh, that milkiness.
Yeah, that milkiness, but that quickly goes away as it settles down. And we get this nice swatch of color. We've added quite a bit of water to it too, and it still has some good opacity. And then I'm going to create my... So you can see how much farther I was able to pull the paint down before it ran out of the brush.
Oh yeah, I'm still going.
Yeah, nice, nice thin consistency. You can see I've lost the brush stroke. You know, it's much more level. So very different look when you're using water.
Another question?
I have two quick ones.
Yeah.
If you're sensitive to paint fumes, how are these? Are these fumey? Are they?
Oh, I don't feel or smell anything.
So I mean, linseed oil definitely has a odor. It's kind of, I don't know, it's like lavender and those kind of, it's that natural kind of essence smell. I think a lot of oil painters really love. There's no intense smell though like you get when there are solvents in paints or solvent mixed with paints. There are some people who have sensitivity to linseed oil. So that's something to be aware of. If that's something that you have, you're still going to be dealing with that. But there are no intense odors from this. Very easy to work in a shared studio environment. Working at the kitchen table, for example, you're not going to drive everybody out of the house at all. Yeah.
I was gonna say I can't smell it from here, and normally I can if we're working with oil.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, if you're on a limited budget, what, in your opinion, are the first 5 colors that you would pick?
I would get these 3 colors right here, which are the cyan, magenta, and yellow, and the primaries, some white. And then some people like to use a black, some people will use an earth color like sienna. Greens are a nice color to add for that 5th color too. But the 3 primaries, a white, and then a black or a green or earth color, your choice at the end. Those 5 will get you almost everything. And there are great combinations that you can get in your earth colors with just these 3 too. We call them the tertiary colors. So you mix these 2 colors together, you get orange, that's a secondary color. But there are ratios that you can use with just the primaries to create a whole range of tertiary colors, the earth colors, that are really nice too. Great question. All right, so the next one we're going to start with one of the mediums. So I'm going to put out a little bit of the yellow. You've already beat me to it. So what we're going to do is start with the painting medium. This is the most commonly used medium. For traditional oil painters, sometimes they would make their own of this painting medium. It would be like a mixture of linseed oil and turpentine or linseed oil and a white spirit, and have that beside their easel, something to dip their brush in and thin their paint out a little bit. So that's how this performs. No solvents here though, just the linseed oil. And what we're going to do is pour out, eyeballing it, about the same amount of oil or painting medium as we have paint. You can see it's got a slight amber color, very fluid. It's like pouring out maple syrup.
Ooh.
It's very pigment hungry though, and watch as we mix these with the paint. You can see how it absorbs the pigment almost instantly. And we've, in fact, kind of doubled the amount of paint we have now by volume anyways. But there's so much pigment in this Cobra that it still maintains some good opacity. One of the things, and I don't know how much you can notice it on camera, it makes the paint glossier. You can see how much easier it flows down, kind of like when we mix with water. We get this nice consistency all the way down. It does level out the brush strokes a little bit. I'll lift it up so you can kind of see it a little better. Comparison there. You can see how the edge of the paint, it's kind of a fluid paint. We use quite a lot. We use equal amounts of medium and paint. A lot of artists just keep a little cup of this beside their palette and they dip the brush in and mix it with it. So even just a small amount loosens up the paint and makes it more enjoyable to paint with, I think, especially on a more absorbent surface like that we're working on right now. And then finally, go back to my magenta here, we will do the paste, which is one of my favorites. I like more impasto techniques in my painting.
Me too. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm excited about this now.
So the paste, the easiest way to describe it, it's like the paint without pigment. So when you squeeze it out, it has that same kind of amber color. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you.
I'll hold that up as well to you so you can kind of see how it looks there. But it has the exact same consistency as the paint out of the tube. So we're able to extend the paint, make it a little more buttery so that it releases more easily on the surface.
Without thinning it out.
Thinning it out, yeah. And also it
that.
doesn't make it glossier. So this made it noticeably glossier. Here we're not going to make it glossier. And you can see how quickly the pigment is absorbed into it too. Again, we're like doubling the volume of paint. This is a great way to extend your paint. So really it costs half as much as a tube of paint, and you can make twice as much paint with it.
Oh yeah, it's definitely holding those brush strokes.
Yep, and then I'll pull it down. It holds the brush strokes, but you'll notice too, I'm able to bring the paint all the way down before it breaks up like it did over here. So it makes it release more easily on the surface and just a more enjoyable result. Question?
For your yellow section, can you remind us what medium that was?
That was the painting medium, 091.
Okay.
Most popular one. We sell more of this than most, and because it's the most traditional type of medium. I think after that, the quick dry medium is probably the most popular, and it does all the same things as the painting medium. In addition, it helps to speed up the oxidation, about 20 to 40%, depending on how much you're adding and the environmental conditions, of course, too.
And then speaking of the oxidation, can you let us know about the drying time of water mixable oils as compared to regular oil paints?
Straight out of the tube, they're going to be exactly like you would encounter with a traditional oil. So it's going to take 24 to 48 hours for it to tack up, depending on how much paint you're putting on there. It can take a couple weeks before it's drying to the touch. And then just like with traditional oils, 6 to 9 months before you start applying a varnish coat. So the same rules you would apply to traditional oils in terms of drying, you would apply to these. Adding a lot of water, like I mentioned before, the water evaporates out in 72 hours. If anything, it's going to make it dry a little bit slower than it would comparable mixture of spirits with oil paint. But the working properties are going to be the same. Fat over lean, for those of you who are concerned about those type of layering techniques, same rules would apply. Great question.
We had somebody asking on YouTube, would you guys ever create something similar to like the Bob Ross Magic White that you can do the wet on with?
We don't have a magic white paint, but I think most whites mixed with a little medium. Often artists would use a little bit of solvent. They would add to their white and then they would brush that onto the canvas. Adding a little solvent or a little bit of medium loosens up the paint and keeps it wet a little bit longer, and so you get those same wet into wet techniques. So you don't have to have that magic white, but we don't make a magic white per se. We do make very specific whites though. We have a zinc white, which is a more transparent white, which is great for mixing. We have a titanium white. Both of these whites that I just mentioned also have small amounts of safflower oil to mitigate yellowing. But then we also have a titanium white in just linseed and a titanium white in just, or a zinc white in just the safflower oil. So you have your choice of whites there depending on the type of techniques, whether you're concerned with fat over lean or whether you want it to be slower drying or faster drying. So you have some choices. The titanium white 105 is the kind of white that is most commonly used and purchased. Yeah.
Now, you guys have been rinsing off your brushes and everything into the water.
Into the water.
And none of the paints that you're using is toxic.
Nope.
So can you pour that water now into your drains? Or what would you do with it?
So the recommendation is not to do that, right? It doesn't matter then it's toxic or not in terms of your safe studio practice. So we always recommend that you let your pigments settle to the bottom of your solvent. So this is true with traditional oils too. So let your pigments settle down. Then you can pour off the water and safely pour that down the drain or reuse it, just like you would with solvent in terms of reusing it. Once that sludge dries out, then you can dispose of that. Depending on where you are, you may have to dispose of it at a waste disposal center that takes those materials. So it all depends on the rules and regs of where you live. But you do want to separate the pigments as much as you can from the water before you pour it down the drain. That's best practices. Does everybody do that? I know they don't. But even just letting it settle overnight and then pouring the water and then cleaning that sludge up and throwing it away does a lot to preventing excess materials going into the groundwater.
All right, I'm having too much fun.
So I got one more thing that I wanted to share.
Yes. Yes.
Before we go, this is a little secret hack here, if you will. So you remember I mentioned not to mix more than 1-to-1 water with the paint, or you risk jeopardizing the paint film, the strength of the paint film. But everybody does it, right?
Right.
Artists do what artists do. So there is a hack that can help you create a very fluid wash of color, but still have enough oil in the binder to adhere, even if that was the final layer of paint on the surface. So we've got some little containers here. And you got a second canvas too?
Oh, yes.
I think so, yeah. So what we do, and we're going to be using a little dirty water, I guess, but that's okay. So what you do is before you start painting, you mix the painting medium 1-to-1 with water. So I'm going to pour a little painting medium. I'll pour yours down. Oh, there we go. And then we're going to use some dirty paint water, so excuse us for that. We might lose some of our magic here because of that, but maybe not.
If not, don't pour it in mine, and if that doesn't work,
We'll go get some
fresh
plain water. Okay. So I'm going to now mix these together. You can see they've kind of separated there. But I'm going to mix them together.
Ooh, so you can see it.
You can see it. See that milky white? That's the emulsion taking place. So we have the painting medium in equal parts with water now. And we've got a little color in there, so I won't have to tint it. That milkiness is actually a nod to the origin of the name, right? So they're called emulsifiers, emulsion. In Greek, that means to milk. And here we've created kind of a milky painting medium. So now at 1:1, there's enough binder to adhere and create a solid paint film, but we can create a wash on the surface that's almost like painting with watercolor. We can mix some paint into it and create those wonderful kind of toned grounds that artists who paint with oils like to do. So a very, thin, lean layer of paint that we can now build the painting on top of, or we can let that dry, and we know that there's enough binder in it to create a durable paint film for the ages. So that's my little hack for everybody.
Well,
And it's
now
fun
that
to paint with,
oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I want to keep going. It's okay. So I do know that we are doing that giveaway.
Okay.
And in order for the giveaway to happen, there is going to be a question. And just so you guys know, the giveaway is going to end in a week. So Monday at 11:59, that will end and you can no longer enter. But you have that time now, so definitely jump in right away. What is the question you want them
All right, so
to
everybody
answer?
remember I was talking about the early Renaissance, and they had a technique of mixing tempera with oils. What did they call that technique?
Tempera with oils. Okay.
We'll really see who was paying attention.
Yes. All right. Well, it looks like we are already done for the night.
Oh my gosh. Any more questions?
Yes.
Everybody's
Do we
good?
have any final questions? Perfect. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This was
Thanks
so
for
much
having
fun. I'm definitely going to be playing with these later.
Oh, do. They're so much fun. They're just a wonderful paint. They're just fun to paint with all by themselves. Water mixable is an
Right.
advantage, but it isn't what makes them wonderful.
Yeah, they're
just
so
great
versatile.
paint. Yeah.
And then if you guys want anything that we use tonight, don't forget that class code JL354. And definitely join us next week. I will be back on for a continuation of our Ophelia Goes to College, so you don't have
Oh
to.
man, I love Ophelia.
So she will be on with me, and I'm going to be teaching her how to draw.
Real quick,
Yes.
Yes.
as a quick reminder, the link for the giveaway is in our chats.
Yes, yes.
And-
Amanda and Emmy will have a link for that.
Go there to fill out the form.
Yes.
If you comment it, it is not an entry.
Yes.
You can comment it, but you are giving the answer away potentially.
Yeah.
Everyone.
We love the comments, but you are giving away the answer.
So definitely use
Make
that
sure you
link,
spell
guys.
link.
Yes.
Are the answers coming in? Can you see
Yes.
them? Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe you guys have free
Oh,
answer.
should we show what we're giving away real
Oh,
quick?
yeah, of course.
We're
Okay.
giving away
so,
some sets.
And these are in combination with the movie that Jeff had mentioned.
Yay, I'll hold them up. You hold up that one, I'll hold
Okay.
up this one. So there's a landscape set and a portrait set based on the palettes they used in the making of the movie The Peasants.
Yes, and
And
these are
there's lots
so
of
nice.
fun colors in them. 10 tubes in total. I think it's $150 value each. Ta-da!
Yeah. Okay, so don't forget to click on that link, answer that question, and get the chance to win one of these sets. All right. So that was the show. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And are you ready to
I'm ready to dance off.
Awesome. Okay. I need to move this out of the way. Both Emmy and I are very short, but thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.